How will we power our future? Can we create a healthy and clean economy? Climate One at the Commonwealth Club is at the forefront of the global debate about energy, economy, and the environment. Bringing together the brightest and most provocative leaders of our time, Climate One is the place where big ideas get heard. With thoughtful and insightful discussions on policy, business, science, and culture, Climate One founder Greg Dalton gets to the heart of the matter. It's our future. It's time to come together.
Images of dancers or sculptures don't leap to mind with the mention of climate change, but artists are increasingly using the carbon conundrum as a creative lens, designing cultural moments that bring people together. As storytellers, artists are reaching people on a deeper and more emotional level than the cerebral facts and charts often used to shape the climate narrative. Today, a conversation about beauty and humanity in the age of climate disruption with celebrated choreographer Alonzo King. Also joining is Nora Lawrence, senior curator at the Storm King Art Center outside New York City. She curated a 2018 collection of sculptures that was one of the first major museum exhibitions to address climate change. This program is underwritten by the Sidney E. Frank Foundation. And in the second half of the show, we talk with environmental icon Erin Brockovich about fighting for clean water in the age of climate change. Art and Erin Brockovich, today on Climate One. Alonzo King, when you think about climate change, what comes to mind for you as an artist? There's so much information and so much grief, so much loss. How do you process that as an artist?
I think that it reduces to something as complicated and as huge as it is. It really, in its reduction, and which is the art process, which is so interesting, is that you are talking about ideas that are so big, and you have to reduce them into symbology. You have to make them a sort of an algebra, so that symbols are really reference for things that are much larger, or words don't have the capacity to really grasp. But when you reduce what we've done to the climate, what we've done to this planet, it is selfishness and greed, plain and simple. Plain and simple, selfishness and greed. And it comes from the irony of not knowing who and what we are, and thinking that ourselves is our bodies. And our bodies are not ourselves, they're separate. It also is an error in education because we don't know what human beings are. We're not those bodies, we're souls playing roles. And if people were to recognize that human beings are valuable, just the fact that they were born. I meet tons of people all the time who lament the fact that they feel worthless unless they have a degree from this place, unless they have money, this amount of money, unless they have celebrity. This is a horrible, horrible education. And so if this is the thinking of the masses, and it is, then we have set up a caste system where certain kind of people are important and other people are less important or not important at all. The same mechanism, the same thinking is what has made art elitist and separate and ivory tower away from the common herd of eaters. And that has to be destroyed. I look at it that every human being, if they are serious about their life, is some kind of artist. And my definition is, and I think people really should look at words and find their own definition, meaning they should search for what is the essence of this idea? How do I see it? And I see that art is the knowledge of how things are done. This is the artistic way, that kind of self-reform of the painting of the book, of the choreography, and the human being. And so if we're serious, we have to say, what have I contributed to this problem? If I've come to a place where I feel I've left the sense of me and expanded the sense of we, and have stepped into the idea of oneness, how can I exploit a mountain? How can I exploit a people? Because I've gotten to a place where I realize that people, that mountain is me. That ocean, that my country is going to and polluting is me. The earliest folks who I remember talking about climate change and the problems they're in were indigenous people saying, I can't fish anymore. What is that thing called shell that comes to my country and does this? I mean, they were saying it long before other people because they were aware of their participation in nature and its changes, and destruction was run amok. So how we treat people is connected to how we think about ourselves and what we think people are.
Nora, I'd like to get your response to a lot in there, including how art can take something so massive as climate change and bring it down to a human scale and something we can kind of, we can respond to that's more relatable, even if it's a little bit abstract.
Absolutely. And I think one work that was very well loved in our exhibition was by an artist named Jenny Kendler, who I think did that also in a way that you were just speaking of, Alonzo. She used the term human exceptionalism, this idea that as humans, we're not allowing ourselves to be part of nature, right? And it lets us make these decisions to extract whatever we're extracting from that mountain, or kill all those fish, or do whatever we need to do, because we don't think of ourselves as just another species. So she did this project called Birds Watching, and she made 100 large-scale replicas of the eyes of different birds that are endangered or threatened with extinction because of climate change within the next 50 years. And she put these 100 eyes out, and they were on kind of the same reflective material. They were full color, but the same reflective material as highway signs. So if you were to take a iPhone shot of them with a flash or something, they'd flash back at you. So they have kind of this nature that is also looking back at you, and they're the eyes. So they're saying, what's different between you and the birds, right? How can you just make this category for yourself called bird and not even think that these are individuals as well? And I think that zeroing in on these moments beyond what you referenced, Alonzo, at the beginning of what you were saying, is just this kind of mass of horror, right? Or this thing that's just way too big for us to kind of keep in mind all the time. But if we look at different parts of it, we can sort of use that almost as a synecdoche for the whole, right? And think about something bigger as well. And I think that's really important for people to be able to do, and that's something that art can help with.
And Alonzo King, you talk about how the human body is a replica of the planet, and that most humans are denatured. What do you mean by that?
That the first thing I was thinking was that when you look at indigenous cultures, even the idea, when someone would say, sign this paper, the idea that someone could own land was such a query that how do you grab that to say, how can I own the land? How is that possible? and the idea also that the earth is mother, and how do you treat mother? A really important question. How do we treat mother? How do we look at women? Big question. And so the nurturer, we're destroying, because there is an abstract idea that this is a planet that we can exploit, instead of seeing it as the provider that we have to take care of, and that anyone who thinks that way is silly. But it's the smartest thinking. In terms of the wonder of human beings, because the reality, even though we have behaved cruelly, we are the pinnacle of creation in terms of nature. And so that means we have a bigger responsibility. The macrocosm, which is mind-boggling when you think 100 billion galaxies, all with their suns, the intelligence doesn't grasp that. It's impossible. The term infinity, intellect doesn't grasp that. What can grasp that? The intuitive experience. We're talking about art making again. If anyone has found a sense of awe within themselves, they would have to realize that as a human being, if I'm able to step away from my ego and step into a vastness, which is the whole point of the little self dancing in groups. In community, you step into the larger self. And so, to answer your question directly, we are miniatures of the cosmos. And so, this little body is actually nothing externally, but internally, the body is gargantuan. And so, our search, our work is really internal. And those discoveries, the great discoveries, are internal.
Nora Lawrence, I'd like to ask you about how you responded to a very public and political piece of protest art recently when you first saw Black Lives Matter painted in yellow letters on a street in Washington, D.C. Where did you see it and how did you receive it? And was it art?
So I first saw it in a very, I'd say, artistic, sort of framed in a very artistic way. So I saw it on the Instagram page of the artist Simone Lee. And I saw it as kind of an elevated, and I'm telling you this because of the aesthetics that felt important, an elevated span of the entire statement. So I didn't hear about it first, I just saw it. For that to be right at the White House felt like it was an incredible day, I guess. So to me, that felt like an artistic experience, something that I didn't know was possible. I didn't know that it was coming. And that, I think also now we've seen it in a lot of other places too, right? So I think that desire for imitation is also speaking to the power that I think that gesture had.
Alonzo King, you've talked about how there's a lot of introspection now. Am I a racist? Am I selfish? Your thoughts on that and what you think of the Black Lives Matter art on the street or any of their other artistic expressions?
I think that there's a lens that's now been opened and focused on what Black, Native American, and Indigenous peoples have seen all the time, that have lived in this horror, have lived in the recognition of anti-Blackness. When you travel around the world and you'll go to communities where everyone is Black and brown, and you look up at the posters and the ads in the cities, and they're all white folks. And it's not reflecting the community or the cities that people inhabit. And you see that in institutions, you see it in ballet companies, wherever it is, because anti-Blackness is enormous and it has to be eradicated. It's huge. The idea of white supremacy, which everyone has taught. Everyone has been taught that. That's been put into people's minds, and it's only people the majority of people who say, no, that is a falsehood. There got to be a point, a critical mass, where people did what? They identified with oppression. They identified with the knee on someone's neck, and that became them. And the them that became is so marvelous because it's compassion. I recognize that this is injustice, is what the eyes of people were seeing. But more importantly, or additionally, I should say, is that it's connected to war, ecological disaster, religious sectarianism, the way women are treated, all of the isms, they're all interconnected. They're not separate. And so the address of this racism, the address of this brutality is the address of all oppression. And the greatest fear of oligarchs, let's be real, is the 99% joining. And so everyone who feels that they have their own oppression, it has to say, no, this is ours. All of us are suffering from this. And those are the big ones: war, ecological destruction, religious sectarianism, racism. Those are the big ones. How we treat people.
Erin Brockovich became a household name in 2000 after Julia Roberts won an Academy Award for portraying her water activism. Famous for her focus on contamination, Brockovich says there's now a larger threat facing the water we drink: climate change. Burning fossil fuels is causing longer droughts and hotter weather that is disrupting water supplies. And epic wildfires, amplified by climate change, damage watersheds and release contamination from burned structures into air and water. Brockovich's new book is Superman's Not Coming: Our National Water Crisis and What We the People Can Do About It. Erin Brockovich, welcome to Climate One. It's great to have you here.
Hi, it's really nice to be here. Thank you. And I want to share with everybody up north and the whole state of California and Oregon. And I hope you're staying safe and well. And it's a rough time. So I hope everybody is taking care of themselves.
You write about how fossil fuels are disrupting where people live, how they live. And I've been thinking about climate change full time for 13 years. There's something different about when we start to breathe it into our lungs. And I'd like to hear, how experiencing climate change is different than anticipating climate change.
That's an excellent question. And because we are experiencing it, because it's not an isolated situation in one country or one part of the state, it's becoming everywhere. And seeing is believing. I think climate change has been something that's been difficult for people because you can't really see it. We think of climate and it's air and where is it? It reminds me when I was out in Hinckley and I was looking at the two-headed frog and the green water. And that visual meant everything to me. And so I talk about climate change a lot. And I had a picture that was sent to me 2 days ago up in Chico at noon. It was dark, but yet it was orange. It was a moonscape. If you don't know what climate change is, that picture shows you. And we're visual. Most of us are. And what's happening now for all of us, we've seen the fires in Australia. We've certainly experienced them on the West Coast. I let people know, if you can think of it as a weather phenomenon, because you can almost visualize a tornado or a hurricane or a fire and what the climate change and the global warming has done. And I let people know because they don't always see it. Somebody asked me, but what does water have to do with climate change? And I'm like, okay, well, that's an excellent question. I'll try not to be frustrated because I'm like, oh my gosh, climate is water, and that is something that I hope you visualize. I mean, part of what's happening here is we've been in this drought, and so we have less water. We talk about in the book, in Johannesburg, South Africa, they were literally going to have no water. So climate change is about too much water, not enough water, no water, drought, flooding. And the conversation is really gearing up and it's always been there. But I believe the conversation's getting bigger because it's affecting everyone and they're actually visually experiencing and seeing a result.
One day, Lori Pop turned on the tap in her home in southern Arizona and brown water came out.
Yes.
What's her story and how is that a cautionary tale?
Oh, well, it's a big one. So, for a whole lot of reasons, I always have to collect my thoughts, or I could just sit here and talk for the next 2 hours about this one issue. So, in the book, we share a collage of photos that come in. They've come in from every single state in the United States and multiple cities. And the green water, I'm telling you, is chromium 6. I've not been wrong on that. You could argue with me about that all day. I'm going to tell you, nope. Chrome 6, and I can tell you right around 1 ppm what color it's going to be. It has a color in water. And then when we see the brown waters and the dirty waters, the black waters, oftentimes we have oil and gas issues. We have tank farms that are leaking. They've come into their backyard, people on well water. But generally across the board, we're seeing these watercolors because we're adding ammonia to the system and we're not treating the dirt appropriately at the municipality. And what's worrisome about those photos is generally often in there is lead. We have 18 million miles of pipeline, of lead pipeline, that we need to address our infrastructure. So regarding that color of the water, is telling us several things: infrastructure issue, pollution issue, bacterial issue, lead issues, and that the water is not being treated appropriately at the municipality. So the best way to explain it, and I have clearly learned because I go through this, when you start talking scientific, I'm like, "Ugh, I can't deal with this." And I see communities do the same thing. They almost like glass over. They're like, "Oh no, we're gonna have to what? What?" It took
Right.
me a
Right.
year to
Yeah.
learn to say perfluorooctanoic acid. I mean, I was like, ah. So we were at a meeting, and Robert Bocock, who I work with, is probably one of the greatest water experts around, and I'm not kidding. And he was talking about organic matter, and I could just see the audience go, or what is that?
Or organic tomatoes. That's what I think, right?
What is that? So I said to Bob, I said, "So Bob, what is organic matter?" And he goes, "Uh, dirt." And so everyone's like, "That I get. Dirt, I get." So as water comes in, it has dirt in it, right? And they have to add chlorination because we don't want to have E. coli outbreaks and things like that. But what a lot of people don't know, and here's a big message: we need to know our water. We need to understand water. And when we do, it changes everything. So, organic matter and chlorination create a very toxic compound known as trihalomethanes, which is very regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act. Now, if we would follow the Safe Drinking Water Act when we can't balance the system and can't keep our THMs controlled, is the appropriate filtration system. But we don't like to do that because we want to do things cheap and take these shortcuts. We can't take shortcuts on water. So adding ammonia to the system can reduce chlorination less effective. And then we have a whole situation happening in the distribution system, which most people don't realize is unregulated. A lot of stuff goes on in there. But when the water becomes corrosive and you have lead pipes, it causes the pipes to pit, and all the iron and the manganese leaks out. That's often what you're seeing when it's coming out of the pipes, but come with it is the lead. So the lead is a huge issue, and if we could change adding ammonia and follow the Safe Drinking Water Act and guidelines for filtration, we would save infrastructure, which is in great need of repair. We all know we're going to have to do something about our infrastructure. And we would have less lead contamination and less Legionnaire outbreaks. We are definitely seeing more Legionnaire outbreaks. We are
Mm.
definitely seeing more lead contamination. We're working on the lead and copper rule. Congressman Dan Kildee has been amazing with that up in Flint, Michigan. And this was a policy written a long time ago that said you could test for lead in water once every 4 years and average the sample. What? We could be missing a whole lot of stuff going on. So for the person that sees that color of water, generally that is one of the number one cause of why you're seeing that discoloration of water. And we really need to get back to basics.
If government is bought by corporations, it takes a lot of people power to flip the balance.
It really does. And get involved in legislation. You got to actually read the bills. It's really very difficult. And this is where I want people to say, well, I don't know how to do that, or how would I do that, or I'm afraid to do that, because I will pick the phone up all day and say, really? Because what does this mean? You giveth and you taketh away. That we were actually able to get that, and in some instances shame them, and actually got it stopped. And so be vocal, and don't be afraid to utilize radio, social media, Facebook, Twitter. Put it out there, put the pressure on, and keep the pressure on. And that makes a very big difference, because you really got them in the hot seat. No means no, we're not doing this. They're banking oftentimes that you go away. Yes, there is an association that's too close, if you ask me. Somebody asked me once, who's worse, corporations or some governmental entities? I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe they sleep in the same bed. Honestly, it's hard to decipher that. Keep the pressure on. I could share with you so many examples. That one on the fire, it was a bad legislation. It would have gotten through. But you know what? Just boom, 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 boom. Keep it on, keep it on, keep it on. Up in Minnesota, they have horrible TCE contamination throughout that state. We've dealt with these communities. One community in particular, here they come, not going to have it. They engaged the media. They got social groups going. They got a local reporter going, and they didn't let up until just recently the governor said, okay, point made. The use of TCE in the state of Minnesota has now been banned. Keep the pressure on.
As we get to the end, I'd like to bring it back to climate. You write a lot about climate and Superman's not coming. And, you know, the impacts are here. They're severe. They're depressing. If you know the science, you know that there's a lot of momentum built up into the system. A lot of changes will continue. More fires, more floods, et cetera. Even if we shut off all the carbon, how do you hold that? How do you not give up or feel overwhelmed by that? Or do you? And then how do you work through it?
Because I believe in people, and I believe we are inherently great. And I believe, just born out of our love for our health, our air, our land, our water, our planet, our homes, our country, it resides within us to want to rise and to want to fight. There are days that you're not going to feel like it, but here's what I want you to do. Give yourself permission. Let me tell you, I've thrown myself on the floor and had a fit and said, I give up. But let yourself go there. Take some breaths, check back in with yourself, get back out into the environment. All of these things will remind you and renew you. Oh, yeah, this is why I get up every single day. And just allow yourself that moment. And one thing that you're right. This just isn't going to be fixed overnight. We have a problem, and we better get together. And we have the technology, we have the means, we can find the money. We need the cooperation. We've got to stop this division and get busy